David Turner had always dreamed of a quiet life in the suburbs. After years of saving, he finally bought a cozy house in a peaceful, tree-lined neighborhood, the kind of place where kids rode their bikes on the sidewalks, neighbors waved in passing, and the biggest concern was keeping your lawn trimmed, or so he thought. The first sign of trouble came just 3 days after he moved in, a crisp white envelope neatly tucked under his front door. No postage, no return address, just a bold red urgent notice stamped across the front. David frowned as he unfolded the letter. Dear homeowner, you are in violation of HOA regulations due to an unauthorized mailbox color. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in a fine of $200 and further action. Neighborhood Compliance Office. David let out a confused chuckle. His mailbox? The same standard black metal box that every other house on the street had? He stepped outside and glanced at his neighbor's mailboxes, identical to his. That can't be right, he muttered. Still, he shrugged it off. Maybe it was a clerical error. A quick phone call to clear things up, and it would be over. But the notice hadn't listed a phone number, only a time and location for a meeting with an HOA officer. Curious but cautious, David showed up at the designated spot, a small unmarked office in the neighborhood's clubhouse. Inside, he found 3 people waiting for him. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in identical navy polo shirts with the HOA logo stitched on the chest. The man in the middle, a burly guy with a thick mustache, leaned forward. Mr. Turner, we need to discuss your violation. David raised an eyebrow. My mailbox? Yes, the man said flatly. It does not meet the updated HOA standards. David hesitated. Updated? I checked the HOA guidelines before moving in. There was nothing about mailboxes. The mustached man exchanged a quick glance with the woman beside him. Her name tag read, Cynthia, Compliance Officer. The guidelines were recently revised, Cynthia said smoothly. Every homeowner is responsible for keeping up with changes. Consider this your first warning. David's instincts prickled. Something wasn't right. He crossed his arms. All right, can I see the updated guidelines? A pause. The mustached man's jaw tightened before Cynthia quickly responded, They're currently being finalized. But rest assured, they are legally binding. David nearly laughed. Legally binding? On a rule he couldn't even see? Tell you what, he said, forcing a polite smile. I'll wait for the official documentation before making any changes. Cynthia's lips pursed. The mustached man leaned forward, his tone dropping. That wouldn't be wise. David felt it then, a shift in the air. This wasn't about a mailbox. This was about control. He left the office with more questions than answers. Who were these HOA officers, and why did their demands feel more like threats? One thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Now, hey, real quick. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. David had hoped that the mailbox incident was just a misunderstanding, a bureaucratic mix-up that would resolve itself. But as the days passed, the situation only got worse. It started with another notice. This time, it was a $150 fine for failure to remove trash cans within the allotted time. David blinked at the paper. He hadn't even put his trash cans out yet. Then came another, a $250 violation for unauthorized landscaping modifications. Modifications? He hadn't touched his yard. At first he assumed it was a mistake, but by the time the 5th fine appeared, this one demanding $500 for an unapproved security camera, David realized the truth. This wasn't an accident. Somebody wanted him to pay up or give up. The notices were bad enough. But then came the visits. One evening, just as the sun was setting, a sharp knock echoed through his house. David opened the door to find 2 familiar figures standing on his porch, Cynthia and the mustached man. We noticed you haven't paid your fines, Mr. Turner, Cynthia said, her voice syrupy but firm. David kept his expression neutral. That's because the fines are nonsense. Mustache Man, who had yet to introduce himself, crossed his arms. That's not the attitude we expect in this neighborhood. David suppressed a laugh. Oh? And what attitude is that? Cynthia smiled, but her eyes were cold. One of cooperation. David felt it again. That subtle pressure, like an invisible hand tightening around his choices. Look, he sighed. "I just moved in. I haven't broken any rules, and you can't find me for things I haven't done." Cynthia reached into her bag and pulled out a new notice. This one wasn't a fine. It was a final compliance warning. "If you refuse to acknowledge the HOA's authority," Cynthia said sweetly, "we'll have to escalate this matter." David's stomach tightened. "Escalate how?" Mustache Man's lip curled. "Let's hope you don't have to find out." They left. Without another word, but the message was clear. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. That night David couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his gut. Something was off about this entire HOA. The ridiculous fines, the lack of actual paperwork, the way they spoke in veiled threats instead of policies. So, he decided to do what any rational person would. He started digging. He pored over every document he had from the home purchase, looking for any mention of these so-called compliance officers. Nothing. He searched the official HOA website. The names Cynthia and Mustache Man were nowhere to be found. Even the contact number listed on the notices didn't match the one on the HOA website. David's pulse quickened. Who the hell were these people? The next morning, David decided to do something bold. He knocked on a few neighbors' doors, asking if they had received similar fines. Most of them were hesitant to talk. Some even closed their doors without a word. But one older man, Mr. Holloway, finally spoke up. "Son," he said in a low voice, "you need to let this go." David frowned. "Why? These fines aren't real, are they?" Holloway exhaled slowly, looking around as if someone might be watching. "I can't say much," he muttered. "But people who fight back, they regret it." A chill crawled down David's spine. "Regret it how?" he pressed. The old man shook his head and closed the door. David stood frozen on the porch, his mind racing. This wasn't just a scam. This was something bigger, and he had a very bad feeling that he was about to find out just how deep it went. David sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, hands hovering over the keyboard. His gut had been screaming at him since that first warning, and now, after days of harassment, threats, and those eerie encounters, he was done ignoring it. He typed in the name of his neighborhood's homeowners association, scrolling through the official website. Board members, policies, financial statements. Everything should be listed here. But as he combed through the pages, a deep frown settled onto his face. There was no mention of Cynthia, no Mustache Man. The compliance office they claimed to represent didn't exist. David's pulse kicked up a notch. He opened the HOA bylaws, searching for any rule about mailboxes, landscaping, security cameras. Nothing matched the fines he had received. His fingers tightened around the edge of the laptop. Who the hell were these people? Determined to dig deeper, David decided to go door to door again, this time pressing harder. The first few neighbors barely cracked their doors, muttering quick excuses before shutting them again. But finally, he found someone willing to talk. Mrs. Alvarez, a widow in her 60s, hesitated before pulling him inside. Her hands trembled as she poured him a cup of tea, her eyes darting toward the window like she expected someone to be watching. "They came after my grandson," she whispered. David leaned in. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "He used to live here with me. Last year, they started sending fines. Ridiculous ones. Parking violations when his car was in our driveway. Unauthorized decorations for a wind chime." David's jaw tightened. "What happened?" Mrs. Alvarez's voice dropped lower. "He fought back, said he wouldn't pay, said he'd go to the real HOA board about it." She exhaled shakily. 2 weeks later, his car was vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed. David felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. She squeezed his hand. "He moved out a month later, said it wasn't worth it, and you—" She took a shaky breath. "You should do the same." David stared at her. "You're saying they did this?" Mrs. Alvarez didn't answer. She just patted his hand and stood. "I think you should go home now, David." David left her house with a rock in his stomach. He knocked on a few more doors and, while most people refused to talk, one pattern became clear. The people who challenged the HOA's fake officers had one thing in common. They either paid up or they left. That night, David sat in his car parked near the clubhouse, watching, waiting. A little after midnight, a sleek black SUV pulled up. The driver's side door opened, and Mustache Man stepped out. David's breath hitched. He quickly ducked down, peering just over the dashboard. The passenger door opened next, and Cynthia got out. They both moved toward the clubhouse, unlocking the door and slipping inside. David grabbed his phone and started recording. If these two weren't part of the real HOA, then what were they doing here so late at night? His mind raced. And then the most shocking realization hit him. David zoomed in on the clubhouse door, capturing the faint sign just above the handle. Private property. No unauthorized entry. His pulse hammered. They had keys. They acted like they ran the place, and yet they weren't listed anywhere on official records. David leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. If they weren't real HOA officers, then what were they? The answer hit him like a punch to the gut. They were con artists, running a fake compliance scam to bleed homeowners dry. And nobody had stopped them because fear kept everyone silent. David stared at his phone, heart pounding. He had proof they were acting under false pretenses. But if he was going to expose them, he needed something stronger, something they couldn't talk their way out of. A plan began to take shape in his mind. It was time to set a trap, and this time, he wouldn't be the one caught off guard. David knew he had poked the hornet's nest. The moment he started questioning the HOA's authority, the pressure escalated. The fines became more frequent, the notices more aggressive. But that wasn't the worst part. The real fear set in when he realized he was being watched. At first, it was subtle. His motion-activated porch light flickered on at odd hours. He'd glance out the window, only to catch a shadow disappearing into the darkness. Then came the anonymous phone calls. Each time he answered, there was nothing but silence. Click. One night, as he pulled into his driveway, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A single nail embedded in the sidewall of his tire. Too perfectly placed to be an accident. David knelt down, his pulse thudding in his ears. Was this a warning? Before he could dwell on it, he spotted something even worse. A car idling at the end of the street. The same black sedan he had noticed the night before. Its engine hummed, but no one stepped out. No headlights? Just waiting. Watching. David's stomach knotted. This wasn't just about petty fines anymore. They were trying to scare him. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. Notice of violation. Your property is subject to foreclosure due to non-payment of HOA fees and compliance fines. Payment due immediately to avoid further legal action. David clenched his jaw. Foreclosure? He grabbed his HOA contract and flipped through it. Nowhere did it say they had the right to seize his home over fabricated violations. This was a bluff, a scare tactic. But what if the others, the ones who had backed down, didn't know that? He thought of Mr. Holloway and the fear in his voice. How many people had they bullied into submission? That evening, as David locked up for the night, the doorbell rang. He checked the peephole. Cynthia and Mustache Man. He exhaled slowly and opened the door, keeping his expression neutral. Evening, Mr. Turner, Cynthia chirped. We need to talk. Mustache Man stepped forward, holding another notice. Your violations are stacking up, he said, his voice low and firm. At this rate, you'll be in serious legal trouble. David folded his arms. Oh? What law am I breaking? Cynthia's smile didn't falter. The law of the community, Mr. Turner. Right, David said, stepping closer. And what happens if I don't comply? Mustache Man grinned, a slow, knowing grin that made David's skin crawl. You'll regret it, he said simply. David held his ground. Then I guess I'll take my chances. Cynthia sighed, slipping the notice into his mailbox. You've been warned. They turned and walked away, leaving David standing in his doorway, his fists clenched. Enough was enough. David locked the door and sat down at his desk. He pulled up his security footage and backed up every second. Then he made copies. He compiled every fraudulent fine, every fake notice, every recorded interaction. If they wanted a fight, he was ready. But something told him this wasn't over yet. Not even close. David knew he couldn't fight this battle on anger alone. He needed evidence. The fake HOA officers were sloppy, too confident in their ability to intimidate. That meant one thing. They would slip up, and when they did, David would be ready. For the next few days, David played the perfect victim. He stopped pushing back, acted hesitant whenever Cynthia or Mustache Man confronted him. He even let them think they were winning, And just as he predicted, they got bolder. On a Thursday evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, David heard a familiar sharp knock at his door. He hit record on his phone before answering. Cynthia stood there, arms crossed, with Mustache Man looming just behind her. "Mr. Turner," she said, not even pretending to be polite anymore. "We're tired of this game. You owe the HOA over $3,000 in fines. Either you pay up or, well, let's just say, things can get very difficult for homeowners who refuse to cooperate." David tilted his head. "Difficult how?" Mustache Man took a step forward. "Accidents happen, Turner. Pipes burst, trees fall, power lines mysteriously get cut. You really want to be on the wrong side of this?" David held back a smile. They had just sealed their own fate. Every word was caught crystal clear on his recording. And now it was time to bury them. That night, David combed through the real HOA bylaws. He cross-checked everything against state laws for homeowners associations. And there it was, the golden loophole. A clause stating that any fine issued must be documented by an official HOA representative. But Cynthia and Mustache Man, they weren't listed anywhere. They had no legal authority, which meant every single fine they had issued was fraudulent. David leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He wasn't just going to expose them, he was going to destroy them. The next morning, David sent everything, the recordings, the fraudulent fines, the legal loophole, to a local investigative reporter. Less than an hour later, his phone rang. "This is huge," the reporter said, barely able to contain their excitement. "Meet me at the neighborhood clubhouse. Let's get these guys on camera." David smiled. Perfect. That evening, David walked into the clubhouse with a hidden mic strapped under his shirt. The reporter was already there, disguised as a potential homebuyer. Right on cue, Cynthia and Mustache Man arrived. Completely unaware they were about to walk into a trap, the reporter played along, asking about HOA rules. Cynthia was more than happy to boast about their strict policies and how they kept the neighborhood in check. Then came the moment of truth. The reporter leaned forward. "So what happens if someone doesn't pay their fines?" Mustache Man smirked. "Let's just say they'll wish they had." Bingo, David turned to the reporter. "That sound like a legal HOA policy to you?" Cynthia's smile froze. Mustache Man stiffened. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. The reporter pulled out a microphone. "A journalist. And I think the public will love to hear about your little scam." Cynthia's face went pale. You can't do this," she stammered. David folded his arms. "Actually, I can, and I just did. This was it. The scam was about to come crashing down. And David? He was just getting started." David stood in the center of the packed clubhouse, his hands steady despite the electric tension in the air. The room was full, neighbors, real HOA board members, and a few unexpected guests. Cynthia and Mustache Man sat near the front, their usual smug expressions replaced with something David hadn't seen before, nervousness. They thought they still had control. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. David cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I asked for this meeting because there's been a lot of confusion, and it's time to clear things up." He placed a thick folder on the table. Every fake fine, every recorded conversation, every law they had broken. "Over the past few weeks, I've been investigating some serious violations of HOA policy. I have proof that certain individuals have been issuing fraudulent fines, threatening homeowners, and pocketing money." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cynthia crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous. The HOA has every right to enforce compliance." David smiled. "You're right. The HOA does. But you don't." Murmurs turned into gasps. David turned to the real HOA board members. "I looked into the official HOA records. There is no neighborhood compliance office. Cynthia, and whatever his name is," David gestured to Mustache Man, whose jaw was visibly clenched. "They don't exist in any legal HOA documentation." Eyes widened. "These two have been running a scam. Not a single one of their fines was authorized. They threatened homeowners, vandalized property, and extorted money, all while pretending to be officials." The crowd erupted. "You stole from us?" someone shouted. "My grandmother paid you hundreds of dollars," another neighbor yelled. Cynthia shot up from her chair. "This is slander. David pulled out his phone. "No, this is a recording of you threatening me." He pressed play. "Accidents happen, Turner. Pipes burst. Trees fall. Power lines mysteriously get cut. You really want to be on the wrong side of this?" Silence. Then, chaos. People turned on them instantly. A neighbor yelled, "You threaten my family!" Cynthia's face drained of color. Mustache Man stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is all fake," David smirked. "Then maybe you should explain that to the police." Right on cue, the doors swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped in. "We've received multiple reports of fraud and harassment. Cynthia Reynolds, Mark Vance." Mustache Man, Mark apparently, looked around wildly. Then he ran. He shoved past the crowd, knocking over an elderly man in his panic. Cynthia stumbled backward, hands shaking. "Mark!" she shrieked. But Mark didn't care. He barreled toward the exit, only to be clotheslined by Mr. Holloway. The old man didn't even flinch as Mark hit the ground with a thud. The crowd cheered. One of the officers pulled out handcuffs. "Guess that answers whether you're guilty, Mark," groaned Cynthia. Realizing she had nowhere to run, slumped back into her chair. David exhaled. It was over. As the officers escorted Cynthia and Mark out, David turned to the crowd. "I know this has been a lot, but no one has to live in fear anymore. If they find you, demanded money, you have every right to get it back." A woman in the back nodded fiercely. "Let's make sure they pay." Cheers erupted. David felt a wave of relief. It started with a single fake fine and ended with a scam collapsing in front of everyone. As the police car disappeared down the street, David let out a breath. For the first time since moving in, his home finally felt safe. David had spent weeks living in fear. The threats, the intimidation, the eerie feeling of being watched, it all ended today. Armed with security footage, fake notices, and undeniable proof, he had sent an anonymous tip to both the police and a local investigative journalist. Now, all that was left to do was wait. David wasn't the only one waiting. From his front window, he could see the clubhouse, where the fake HOA officers were holding their usual compliance meetings. Only this time, it wasn't just scared homeowners walking in. A few plainclothes detectives had slipped inside, blending with the crowd. David's heart pounded. Any second now. Then, boom! The front doors burst open. Uniformed officers swarmed the building. Shouts echoed through the clubhouse. Cynthia shot up from her chair, eyes wide with shock. Mustache Man went pale, his hands trembling as officers rushed toward him. "Hands where we can see them." Cynthia took a step back. "But we're with the HOA. This is a misunderstanding." But the officers weren't buying it. "We've already verified with the real HOA board," one officer said coldly. "You don't work for them. You never did." The color drained from Cynthia's face. Mustache Man bolted for the back exit, only to slam straight into an officer waiting outside. Game over. As officers led them away in cuffs, David stepped forward, watching. Neighbors had gathered, whispering amongst themselves. Fear was giving way to something new, relief. A detective approached David, shaking his head. "You were right. These two have been running an illegal extortion scheme for years." David's stomach tightened. How? They infiltrated neighborhoods with weak HOA oversight. Then they'd create fake violations, fine homeowners, and pocket the money. David exhaled slowly. "How much did they take?" The detective sighed. "We're still calculating. But from what we've seen, hundreds of thousands." A horrified murmur swept through the crowd. Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly widow, wiped a tear from her eye. "They robbed us blind." Word spread fast. By morning, David's name was all over the news. Local homeowner takes down corrupt HOA officials. Neighbors who had once avoided him now knocked on his door, thanking him for standing up when no one else could. Even the real HOA board issued a public statement, apologizing for the oversight and promising reform. But David wasn't looking for praise, he was looking for answers. A week later, David received a call from the lead investigator. "You were right about Cynthia and her partner. But there's something else you should know." David sat up. "What is it?" The detective hesitated. These two weren't acting alone. David's blood ran cold. There was a third party pulling the strings. Someone with real power. David gripped the phone tighter. Who? Silence. Then, we'll be in touch. The call ended, leaving David staring at his phone, heart pounding. This wasn't over. Not even close. David had thought it was over. The fake HOA officers were in custody. The neighborhood was free from their grip. The news had hailed him a hero, but something wasn't sitting right. The detective's words kept it replaying in his mind. There was a third party pulling the strings, someone with real power. David knew one thing for sure. He wasn't done digging. Late that night, David sat at his desk, combing through public records, financial reports, anything connected to the HOA. He traced bank transactions linked to the fraudulent fines, hoping to find where the money was really going. And then, he found it. A series of wire transfers leading to an offshore account. But the name tied to it wasn't Cynthia or Mustache Man. It was someone higher up. David's breath caught in his throat. Nathan Holloway. Nathan Holloway. The same Mr. Holloway who had warned him to drop it. The quiet, fearful old man who had told him people who fight back regret it. David felt sick. Holloway hadn't been a victim. He had been in on it the whole time. The next morning, David paid Holloway a visit. When the old man opened the door, his face paled. David, what are you doing here? David held up a folder. I know everything. Holloway swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. David stepped forward. The fake HOA, the fines, the threats, it all traces back to you. You weren't scared of them, Holloway. You were running them. The old man sagged against the doorframe. You don't understand, he whispered. It wasn't supposed to get out of hand. David's jaw tightened. You extorted your own neighbors. Holloway rubbed a trembling hand over his face. I was drowning in debt. The HOA board. They weren't paying me enough. When Cynthia and her partner approached me, they had the whole system figured out. I just had to look the other way. David's stomach churned. And the families who lost their homes? The people who left everything behind? Holloway's eyes were wet. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. David let out a bitter laugh. But they did. He held up his phone. The red light was blinking, recording. Holloway's face drained of color. You just confessed, David said quietly. Before Holloway could slam the door, a car pulled up. Detectives stepped out. David turned to leave as Holloway crumpled onto the porch. It was over. Days later, as David walked through the neighborhood, he noticed something different. The fear was gone. People smiled again, laughed. Kids rode their bikes without their parents watching the streets. For the first time since moving in, it actually felt like home. He had stood up. He had fought back. And in the end, he had won. I'll now calculate the exact word count to confirm it meets the 600-word requirement. The section currently has 475 words, which is 125 words short of the required 600 words. I'll now expand it while maintaining the suspenseful and immersive storytelling style. Here's the extended version with the correct word count. David had thought it was over. The fake HOA officers were in custody. The neighborhood was free from their grip. The news had hailed him a hero, but something wasn't sitting right. The detective's words kept replaying in his mind. There was a third party pulling the strings, someone with real power. David knew one thing for sure. He wasn't done digging. Late that night, David sat at his desk, combing through public records, financial reports, anything connected to the HOA. He traced bank transactions linked to the fraudulent fines, hoping to find where the money was really going. And then he found it. A series of wire transfers leading to an offshore account. But the name tied to it wasn't Cynthia or Mustache Man. It was someone higher up. David's breath caught in his throat. Nathan Holloway. Nathan Holloway. The same Mr. Holloway who had warned him to drop it. The quiet, fearful old man who had told him people who fight back regret it. David felt sick. Holloway hadn't been a victim. He had been in on it the whole time. Worse yet, he had played everyone. The scam had gone on for years. The fake HOA officers were nothing more than pawns. And now, It was time for the king to fall. The next morning, David paid Holloway a visit. When the old man opened the door, his face paled. "David, what are you doing here?" David held up a folder. "I know everything." Holloway swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about." David stepped forward. "The fake HOA, the fines, the threats, it all traces back to you. You weren't scared of them, Holloway. You were running them." The old man sagged against the doorframe. "You don't understand," he whispered. "It wasn't supposed to get out of hand." David's jaw tightened. "You extorted your own neighbors." Holloway rubbed a trembling hand over his face. "I was drowning in debt. The HOA board. They weren't paying me enough. When Cynthia and her partner approached me, they had the whole system figured out. I just had to look the other way." David's stomach churned. "And the families who lost their homes? The people who left everything behind?" Holloway's eyes were wet. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt." David let out a bitter laugh. "But they did." He held up his phone. The red light was blinking. Recording. Holloway's face drained of color. You just confessed," David said quietly. Before Holloway could slam the door, a car pulled up. Detectives stepped out. David turned to leave as Holloway crumpled onto the porch. It was over. A week later, David received a call from the lead investigator. "David, you did more than just expose a scam. You helped bring down a statewide fraud ring." Holloway had ties to multiple fake HOA scams. David exhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" "He's facing multiple felony charges. And with the evidence you gathered, he's not getting out of this one." David nodded. The weight in his chest finally lifted. He had won. Days later, as David walked through the neighborhood, he noticed something different. The fear was gone. People smiled again, laughed. Kids rode their bikes without their parents watching the streets. For the first time since moving in, it actually felt like home. Neighbors approached him, shaking his hand. "We owe you, David," one said. "You stood up when no one else would." David simply smiled. No one should have to live in fear in their own home. This wasn't just about his fight. It was about every homeowner who had been bullied into silence. He had stood up. He had fought back. And in the end, he had won. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support means the world.